Hi, everybody. We'll wait a few minutes for people to join. I would be happy if you turn your videos on because it's extremely disturbing to be talking to an empty screen. Jasmine and Yuval, you're with us?
Yes, I can't have a camera though.
Yes.
Can you turn your camera on, please? Jasmine? Thanks. Hi, Toby. We'll start in a minute. And as I said, it's really disturbing. I don't know if you ever gave a talk with on Zoom, but it's pretty disturbing to be talking to an empty screen. So if you could turn your cameras on, it would be really helpful. טובי?
זה אריאל האמת היא.
אני יודעת, בגלל זה לא הבנתי למה כתוב טובי. טוב.
כן.
יובל, אתה יכול לפתוח את המצלמה? שאני לא אדבר עם ריבוע ירוק?
אני לא יכול, אולי בהמשך כרגע כאילו אני לא
אתה במקלחת?
לא, יש אנשים מסביבי.
הבנתי. סבבה. אמ, טוב, so let's start. Hi everybody. We had a challenging week, obviously. I hope everybody is okay. Um, and today we'll make okay, first we will make the lecture slightly shorter today. It will be between 45 minutes and 1 hour. To kind of take into account that you all went through a hard week and have a lot of work, etc. So I will make it shorter. Um, I will touch a subject today which is very important, which is called object-oriented coding. Um, I've really tried to keep the rest of the lecture to the minimal amount that you guys need to have when you finish this course. So next week we will finish the what we're talking about today shortly, and then the rest of the lecture next week will be dedicated to reviewing things, mostly pandas and the stuff we will be talking about today. Okay, so that we don't add more subjects last week. We will be repeating things, and hopefully, I'm currently stuck in abroad, but hopefully, I will have a flight soon. And then the plan for next lecture is that it will be interactive. I will give you some exercises and let you try, and then go in between each of you and try to see if you encounter difficulties, if you need some help, what can be improved, etc. Okay, so next lecture will be hopefully in person and mostly interactive based on exercises, which will be mostly on pandas and mostly on the stuff that you will have on the exam, and I will try to help you and we will try to make it interactive. Okay?
When is the exam?
I don't know. It's you have it in the schedule. I don't know it by heart. Do you
I
know?
think it's August 5th.
5th? August 5th? Okay.
Okay.
So, okay. I will also say that most of the things that I will talk about today, do you have access to the recording from the previous years? No? Okay, so I find Zoom to be a very difficult medium. I don't know if you agree with me, but I find it harder to follow lectures on Zoom. Do you agree? Or do you find maybe you're part of a generation that is so used to it that it's fine? But I personally find it harder. So I will share with you on Lambda the recording from 2 years ago, which was more or less the same things that I will be talking about today, but in person. So if it's maybe it will be easier. Maybe it will be easier to learn from there or to work on the exam from there than from the recording of today. Okay. And I don't know if you have a way to tell your fellows this. Anyway, I will write it מסודר on Lambda. Okay, so let's start. I will share my screen. Okay, so first question. We're a small enough group. I would like to ask you who here already heard of or used object-oriented coding. Okay, so Odelia, you never heard of it. Jasmine, neither.
I didn't hear about it either.
Okay, and Ariel?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, perfect. Because I was going to say that one of the difficulties in a heterogeneous group is that object-oriented is common. It's a concept. We will talk about it a lot in the coming hour, but it's a concept that is used in many, many um, languages. It's not specific to Python at all. So usually if you already coded in other languages, you could have had some experience of it. And then since I'm starting from scratches to explain about it, it could be a bit slow, but okay, so it's very good to know that this group here, in this group, none of you have heard of it, and we would really start from the beginning. So let me share my screen. Um, hmm. One second. Um, okay. So, share. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. Now, okay, and now you see it in big, right? Very good. Okay, so this is summary of what we've done so far. We always do it. I see that there is a typo here. Okay, so quickly, these are the things you should have in mind, and if you don't have them fresh in mind, then for the exam, keep in mind that this is a list of things that you should have by now in mind. And so last time I didn't give the lecture, but I'm showing here a summary of all the pandas commands that we expect you to also to have in mind, both from the lecture I gave and from the tutorial of last time. Hi, Matan. Matan has joined us. Okay, so this is the list of Panda commands that you should have in mind. And again, the final exam will also be with access to your notes, but you will not have time. if you don't have these Panda commands in mind, you will not have time to rediscover them. You can use your notes to remember the exact syntax, but these are commands that we want you to have in mind. Okay. And as I said, Matan, you were not here in the beginning, but in the next lecture, we will dedicate a nice chunk to just review part of these commands, and a large chunk of the final exam will be on Panda. Okay, this is important because Panda is so useful for many research projects, for your research. I really want this course to be practical for you and to be useful for your research. So at least half of the exam will be Panda. Okay, this is something that we want you to put an emphasis on when you work on for the exam. Okay, Matan, I did a quick survey before you joined. Did you hear or used object-oriented coding in your career as a programmer?
Well, I learned C, so I used their C++.
Okay, so you heard of it?
Yeah.
You used it? Did you build your code in a object-oriented manner?
Yes.
Okay, so you're the only one in this group here today. And so, as I said, I'm
Okay.
starting from scratches. I'm really starting from the beginning to explain this. And it's a slightly complex framework sometimes. So I think it will be good anyway. Okay, so we will start with some general thoughts on object-oriented coding. I looked for many thoughts about object-oriented on the internet, and I'm going to do now something you're not supposed to do, which is explaining a joke. Okay, so one of the main concepts in object-oriented coding is the concept of a class. Okay, we will talk a lot about what we mean by a class, but a class is one of the key building block of object-oriented coding, and this is why this quote is funny, because this is Marx and he's talking about fights between the classes. Okay, this is what makes the joke funny. Okay. So a class is an important concept, and we will talk about it a lot in the coming hour. And here are some other thoughts about object-oriented. So this is the left one is from a Danish programmer who said that object-oriented programming is an exceptionally bad idea, which could only have originated in California. I think he's being a bit cynical here. Okay, I don't think it's a bad idea. Many people don't think it's a bad idea. Okay, it has a lot of advantages to code in an object-oriented way. We will talk about it. But the reason why I'm bringing this is basically the idea of the second quote is that object-oriented is a framework. It's an approach to coding. Okay, it's a way of coding, of making your code. It has advantages of disadvantages, but just because you use this approach doesn't mean your code will be a good code, and you can write amazing code without using object-oriented. So one of the main advantages, you remember that I showed you the wet and dry slide, where dry code is writing things in a very compact way, and a wet code is repeating everything twice. Okay, so the main advantage of the object-oriented approach is that it helps us structure our code and make it drier. Okay, it avoids repeating over and over the same things over our code, but you can certainly write very good code without using this approach. Okay, this is the second quote I brought. Okay, so let's see if I said everything. Okay, so this is the definition. We will now dive into the more technical aspects of object-oriented. I should say that there is a whole theory in computer science about object-oriented coding. I'm not going to take this approach. I'm not going to explain the deep theoretical aspects of it, okay? I'll try to give you the most practical explanation of it, okay? I want you to be able to use it in your everyday coding. And this is what you would find if you type object-oriented programming on Wikipedia. Okay, so object-oriented programming, I'm reading, is a programming paradigm. Okay, paradigm is a bit of a fancy word. Okay, it's an approach to coding, and it's based on the concept of objects. Okay, an object is the main building block of object-oriented coding, and objects can contain either data or code. Okay, so I will give many examples of this. So the data is in the form of fields. Fields is something that I will never use, okay? We use in Python, we use the terms attributes or properties. And the code is, so this is the data, okay? I said that it can be, an object can be either data or code. The data is in the form of attributes of properties, and the code is in the form of what we call procedures. But again, in Python, we don't really use this term procedure. We use the term methods. Okay? So, any questions until now? No. Good. I will give many examples. Okay, so what this tells us is that a for loop, for example, is not an object. Okay? This tells us what is an object and what is not an object. An object can be either a chunk of code, and we'll give example again, don't worry, or it can be a piece of data. But there are all kinds of things which cannot be objects. For example, a for loop or I'm trying to think of things that cannot be instanced to an object, but okay, let's keep it that way. Okay, a for loop is not an object, but a piece of code can be. And let's jump into the example as soon as possible so that you have a practical examples. Okay, so why is it helpful to use object-oriented coding? It helps us structure our code. Okay, so it's like a large work of Lego, our code. And in the same way that functions, you remember, were helping us to not have to repeat the same things over and over in our codes, object-oriented in general can help us structure our code. And a lot of the things that we did until now, you could be rewriting them in an object-oriented way, and it would probably make it much more compact. Okay, so it makes coding easy to use and reuse, just like functions. And it also makes code easy to build upon. So, for example, if you wrote your code in an object-oriented way and you defined classes and you defined objects and etc., it will be easier for you to reuse your code in another code. Okay, it makes it more easily portable from one project to another. Okay. Okay, so you remember that we said that we either have an object, it's either data or codes, okay? And so here, again, we have on the one side data associated with a specific class. We'll see in a minute what we mean by a class. Okay, so the data, we call it attributes. I'm now repeating what was here, but in a more structured way, okay? When an object is data, we call it attributes. When an object is a piece of code, so a function, we call it a method, okay? And these are the two building blocks of object-oriented coding. Are there any questions until now? It's still a bit abstract, but the moment we will start coding, it will be much easier. Matan, does it follow what you already knew from C?
Yes.
Good.
I
don't know, in
mentioned
C, do you use fields and procedures or attributes and methods?
I think we used methods and attributes, not in C, in C++, in CPP.
in C++. Good.
האמת היא שאני חושב שגם אני נתקלתי בנושא הזה, כאילו אם זה מחלקות, אז כאילו עשיתי בג'אווה כל מיני דברים עם זה.
Yes, it's so object-oriented coding is an approach that is really crosses languages. Okay, good. Okay, now let's dive into what are these building blocks that I talked about. And you see that I mentioned the word class. I also mentioned it in this funny quote with Karl Marx. But I also said that the basic building block in object-oriented are objects. Okay, so what is the difference between a class and an object? This is a very important difference. Okay, so and the way to think about it is, I think there is a nice metaphor, which is the difference between a blueprint, תוכנית, okay, שרטוט, a blueprint, the blueprint of a house, okay, and the house itself, okay? So the class is the definition of the object, in the same way that in the blueprint of a house, you defined how big it will be, what properties it will have, etc. Okay, so it's just, the class is just the definition. It doesn't allocate, it doesn't use any room in your memory. Okay, and the object is the house. It's basically the instance. This is a very important term. Instantiation or instance of the blueprint. So in Hebrew, I would say it's the mimush of the תוכנית. Okay? And the difference between the class and an object is the difference between תוכנית and מימוש התוכנית. Okay? So in the instance is where you basically use the blueprint and make it a real thing. Okay? And the moment you define an object, it does use memory on your computer. Okay? And it's basically an instance of this class. So here we have a definition. We defined a class called rectangle, and it has all kinds of properties. It has a height, a width, a color, etc. And if we kept it this way, no rectangle would exist in our code. Okay, just the plan for a rectangle. Now, the moment I write this line, I made R an instance of this class. So I now have an object which exists, which is a rectangle. Okay, but before I use this line, I wouldn't have any actual rectangle in my code or my memory. Okay, does it make sense? Okay, and this is a way to maybe have it in mind. Okay, the class is the plan, it's the blueprint, and the object is the instance of the class, of the... Okay, it's where you bring your plan to the real world. Okay, good. So now let's write a bit of code, because we defined many abstract concepts, and I would like to make it more practical. Okay, so do you see my screen? Yes? Okay. So we will now explore a bit the differences between the object and the class. Okay? And we will play Frankenstein. Okay? What I want to create are human being. Okay? So I will define the class, which is called human. Okay, and for now I will just make it empty. Okay, just so that we can do some exploration, and after I will make it more complex. Okay, and now So until now, this is just a plan. Okay, I didn't create any human. Now I will start to create two humans. Okay, human 1 and human 2. They are both
רשמת פס, כאילו, מה זאת אומרת עוד פעם?
pass is just because for now I want to make it the simplest class as possible. I don't want to confuse you by starting to make a more complex class. For now, I just make the simplest class as possible. You will never use it in your code. It's just for me now for teaching reasons. I don't want to confuse you with what the class is doing and just defining it, okay?
זה פשוט אומר לדלג או משהו?
זה אומר לפייתון שאני רוצה שזה יהיה ריק, ואני לא יכולה רק לשים את זה ריק. Okay? I cannot just have it empty. Okay? So let's run it. Okay, it's running. Now let's see what happens if I print human 1 and human 2. Okay, so what it tells me here is that that's not very easy to understand, but this tells me that human 1 is an object. It's an instantiation. The brackets here means that this is an object. It's an instance of my class. And why is it interesting to print it? Because if you remember, this gives me a look into you see that this here, it tells me where the object is in the memory. Do you remember this? Yes? Are you with me? You see that this number here, it tells me the address of the things in the memory. So you see that human 1 and human 2 have been allocated different locations in the memory. Okay, and they take room in the memory. Okay? Okay, now let's see what are the types of human 1 and human 2. So I will first print the type of human. Okay, so okay, so human is basically, let's look at it. So human with a capital H here is the class. The type of it is the class. Okay? And human 1 is basically an object, which is an instance. You see that they have different types too, according to Python. Okay, one is a class, one is the actual object. Okay? Okay, now it looks...
לא רשום אובייקט, אז כאילו רשום שם קלאס מניו.
נכון, אבל אתה רואה שהם שונים.
אז כאילו, שזה רושם לי קלאס מיין human זה אומר אובייקט?
כן, זה אומר שהם אובייקטים, כן. We will actually, I think here it's I think this is telling me about the type class, but this is a good question why it's not telling it's an object. The important thing that I wanted to show you is that they are different. Okay? And it could be also because we didn't populate it at all. Okay? Now, okay, this all sounds like new concepts maybe, but it's important to realize that they were here all the time. So, for example, if I print hello, Okay. So hello is basically a string object. Okay, there is somewhere in Python, there is a class which is called string. Okay, and hello is an instance of this class. Make sense? So string is defined somewhere as a blueprint, as a class. And the moment I write, I define the variable hello, I'm defining an instance, an object that is an instance of the class string. Okay? So these concepts are around us all the time when we code in Python. Okay, now we will start to populate this. It's very hot. Where I am. Okay, now we will start to write a more complex class. And a very important thing that I want to show you is the difference between what we call instance variables and class variables. I think
אני יכול רק לשאול שאלה. אמרת שיצרת את ההלו הזה, זה כאילו הופך לאובייקט של הקלאס סטרינג?
כן.
אוקיי.
כן, בדיוק. יש קלאס איפשהו בפייתון, there is a class which is the string class, and hello is just an instance of this class. Okay? Good. Okay, now let's say I will introduce a difference between two types of variables, and then we will give examples and start to write a more complex class. Okay, so there are two types of variables we will be dealing with. There are variables called instant variables. And these variables are used for data that is unique to each of the instance of the class. Okay, so I will give an example in a second, but for example, let's assume that I want to define a variable which has the name of each of the humans that I create. Okay, each human has a specific name. Okay, the name of each of us is unique to each of us. Okay, and so I will define it as an instance variable. And what is special about instance variable is that we will define them using an argument called self. Okay, I'm aware it's a lot of information at once, but okay, try to follow. And there are other examples of variables which are shared by all the instances of my class, by all the objects of my class. Okay, and these are called class variables. And for these variables, I'm not using the word self. Okay, and this, for example, let's try to think about a property which I want to be shared by all the people by all the humans who are going to be creating. Let's give an example. I want them all to be okay, I want to change their weight. Okay, and I want to change it by the same amount. I want them all to gain 5 kilos. Okay, so somewhere in my class, I will write gain weight equal 5. And this will be shared by all the objects, all the instances of my class. Okay, so let's give an example. And I wrote here that there is a lot of room for creativity in object-oriented coding, because if I gave you the same problem, you could write it in many different ways using an object-oriented framework, okay? And this is where your creativity, you can have creativity, okay? You can choose. There is a lot of flexibility and room for creativity in the way you will define things. But let's move back to the code itself.
שרשום shared overall instances, אז כאילו לכל האובייקטים?
כן, it means, so instances by instance, an instance of a class is an object. And Ariel asked is shared by all instances, meaning it's shared by all the objects, and the answer is yes. Okay, the class variables are things that are shared by all the objects for a given class. Okay, if I bring it back to the metaphor between the blueprint and the roof, let's assume that I have a variable in my footprint, which is the color of the roof, and I want all the roof to be red. So this will be a class variable. I will define color roof equal red, and this will be shared by all the houses which have this footprint, the class that defines the house. Okay, so let's give examples. It's much easier to understand with examples. Okay, so let's start with instance variables. Instance variables. You see my code, right? And
Yes.
let's first do it without a class. Okay, so I want to define the first name of human one. How do you want to call her? She will be a woman. So last time I did it with Adam and Eve, okay? So I called the first one Eve, and I called the second one Adam, okay? And okay, I need to define, you remember, I need to first define human one and human two. Okay, so I gave them their first name. Let's give them an age. How old is Eve? Come on, give me some food for my Frankenstein. Odelia, how old is Eve?
20.
20? Okay. How old is Adam?
25.
25? We're being very mainstream
Creative.
here. Last time they gave many very audacious things. Okay, and they both have an email address in Paradise. One email address is equal to Eve dot Smith. Smith is her family name. Okay. .com. Okay, and human 2 email address. So you see that here I'm basically repeating things a lot because I'm doing it manually.
ושאת עושה human אחד שווה human סוגריים, זה אומר שאת מגדירה כאילו object שהוא מהקלאס human?
Exactly.
אוקיי.
Okay, so good. Okay, so I see that last time Adam was 7 years old. Just saying. Okay. Okay, now you see that we don't get much benefit from doing this way. I mean, it's not so compact. It's basically not compact at all. Okay, so what I will do is that I will do things differently. Inside the class human, I will use a method. Do you remember what a method is? A method is a piece of code. Okay, it's as opposed to data. Okay, and each class has an init method in it, okay, called self, which takes a self as an argument. Okay, and first name, age, email address. Okay. Good. Now here I could have it, 1 second. This is important to realize that this doesn't have to be the same as this. Do you see where I put blue? Do you see? the first name here and the F name here, they don't have to be the same, but usually we do it to avoid mistake, okay? But it's important. It doesn't have this doesn't have to be called the same as what's here, okay? We just do it because it's easier, okay? It avoids making mistakes. Okay, now what's important is that this init method, it's basically a code that is run every time you create an object. Okay, every time you instance the object human, this init thing will be run. Okay, this is very important. And so now, instead of defining things like this manually, I will define human1 as a human called Eve. Her age, we say, is 20. And her email address, I will make things more, let's give her also a family name. Okay, so family name is family name, and her email address is going to be first name plus family name. Okay. So she's called Eve. Her family name is Smith. And she's 20. Okay? Now, let's see if it worked. Okay, I now want to print human1, her age. Okay, let's run it. Okay, so it worked. I defined here, you see that it's a more compact way to write things, because now I can write human2 equal, his name was Cohen, I think. Okay, so I don't have to redefine each time. Remember that what I just erased, I had human2 dot first name, human2 dot family name, human2 dot age. I had to redefine it for each human. Now I just have one place here, the class, where I define the attributes, the properties of which I want to be specific to all of the human I'm creating. Okay, and then when I create the objects, when I just instance this class, create an instance of this class, okay, it's basically running this method, and it's creating an object with these attributes, with these properties. Okay, so let's print the email address of the second human, and you see that it's working. Okay, good.
Can I still use both of the ones? For example, only for Eve, I want to add, I don't know, gender. I can add only like human1 dot.
Absolutely. So I can define here human1 dot gender, and I would assume, I don't want to put any constraint here, but let's assume she's a female, okay? Yes, I can, but if you only want to do it for human1, you probably don't need to put it in the class, okay? But yes, you can absolutely do it.
לא חייבים לרשום את זה בקלאס הזה?
לא. So Ori is asking if we don't need to put it in the class. We don't, but it all depends. If you want gender to be specific to Eve, okay, to one object, okay, if we go to the footprint and houses, if you want only one house to have, I don't know, a door, a blue door, okay, you would only define it for this house. But if it's something that you want to be an attribute, or potentially an attribute of all the objects that you create with this footprint, you should put it in the class. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, now let's put, you remember I said that there are objects, we have data and functions. Okay, objects can either be data or functions. So now let's add some operations in this class. Okay. Let's assume that for each of the human that I'm creating, I want to have an option to write a small text. Let's also start with doing it manually. So I want to print the name of this human is her email address is 2. Okay, so I can do this for every human. Let's assume that I created 20 human. I can repeat this over and over for all of the humans. Okay? The name of this human is Eve Smith and her email address is this. But I don't want to repeat it. Remember, one of the advantages, one of the features of object-oriented is that it allows me to write things dry, to not have to repeat things over and over. So I will define a method, okay, a small piece of code inside.
את יכולה רגע לרדת למטה שאני אצלם את השורה הזו?
כן.
Okay.
Okay, so I will write a small function, which we call it a method, a function that is defined within the class. We call it a method, and we call it printing ID. Okay, and this returns return. What did I want to put here? The name.
ובעצם שאמרת לו, שרשמת 0 והאחד הזה בסוגריים המסולסלים, אמרת לו להדפיס את השם והשם משפחה, נכון? כי זה
And but this is so Ariel is asking about this, and this is not specific to object oriented. This is this we talked about in the first lecture when we want to format a string. Okay, I could have put here if you're confused by this. But you shouldn't be at this stage because we talked about it a long time ago. And so family name. Okay, so this will be a method that will be defined for all the objects that I define with this class, okay? And let's use it. And this will avoid having to print these things over and over for each object. Okay, so I now want to do it for human 2. Let's see if it's working. Okay, the name of this human is Eve Smith. It's working. Okay. So what we did now is that we put a method within our class, okay? By method, we mean a small piece of code within our class that will be run for all the objects. Okay, now you remember, and this will be the last thing that I will talk about today before we stop. You remember that I spoke in the presentation about instance variables and class variables. Okay, so the instance variables are the things that are specific to each of the objects. For example, the name of the objects are specifically defined for each of the objects, right? There is the name Eve, the name Adam. They are like attributes of a given object. But let's assume that I now have some attributes which I want to be shared by all the instance of my class. Okay, and for these are called class variables, and for these I will not define them with the self. You see that the self here is what tells me that these are instance variables. Okay. Wait, I just see that there is one more thing. I wanted to show you what happens.
שרשמת הפעולה הזאת על הפרינטינג איי-די עבור הסלף, בגלל שזה ניגש כאילו לקלאס, כאילו לחתיכת קוד הזאת בקלאס, אז זה מדפיס לך עבור כל האנשים? לא, את עשית פרינט עבור יומן אחד ועבור יומן שתיים.
And I want to show you one thing. What happened if I write here? One second. I have 7 minutes left, so I will I'll show you this specific thing that I wanted to show you now next time. But I want to give you now an example of a class variable. Okay, so let's assume that I want to make all these humans older by 2 years. Okay, so I'm going to define a class variables, which is called additional year. And now I will define the methods that makes all the humans older. Okay? And this means that I will increase the age of all the humans by this variable. Okay? Now let's see if it's working. So human 1 is Eve. Let's print her age. Age. Okay. You see that here I don't have parentheses after age because age is an attribute. It's not a method. But I'll show you an example. You see that for age, I don't need parentheses. For printing ID, I do need parentheses. And this tells me that age, this is an important distinction. Age is an attribute, okay? And printing ID is a method, it's a function. It receives arguments, right? Age doesn't receive arguments. Printing ID, it does receive arguments. I could also add here another argument. For example, let's add I'm trying to think of this. Okay, I'm going to add an adjective here. of this. Right, okay, and here I want to add beautiful.
אז המייק הולדר זה בעצם דאטה?
כן, אבל אני רוצה שנייה לפני שאני מדברת על המייק הולדר. Okay, look what happened here. Here I added in printing ID, I added an additional variable, okay, which is one thing that I want to add to say about this human. And here I put it here as beautiful. And then here it's printing the name of this beautiful human is Eve. And this is to show you that the methods that you're defining, they by default, they inherit of all the instance variables here, all the selves, but you can also add other variables if you want. Okay, does it make sense? If I didn't put here this beautiful, it will probably complain because it needs it. Yes, it complains because it needs an adjective, but you see that it doesn't need me to define the first name, the family name, the age, and the email address. It only needs these variables that are here because all the methods in my class, this is an important point, they inherit these variables. Okay, now let's define this additional here. Let's use it because we have like 3 minutes left, and this was the last thing that I want to show you. Okay, so I'm going to make her clever, okay? Okay, and now I want to, so we print her age already, and now I want to apply on her the make older. So I'm going to do this. And you see that here again, I have parentheses. Why do I have parentheses? Because make older is not a variable, it's a method, okay? And why are the parentheses empty? Because it's only using attributes here, the age, right? And it's using this class variable that it's defined here. But in the same way as I added here adjective, I could also add other variables here, but I decided not to do it to keep it simple. Okay, and now I will print her new age. The new age of the human is now. Okay, so let's see if it worked. Before applying make older the age of the human. Okay, let's see. Okay, so it worked. Okay, before applying make older, the age of Eve was 20. Okay, then I told her to print to use printing ID. Okay, and the new age of this human is now 25. Okay, so I just gave you, let's summarize what we did. Okay, we basically defined the class, okay, which is the blueprint of an object called human. Okay, in this class, we have two different types of variables. We have class variables, which are common to all the instances of this class. So if I applied make older to Adam, it will use the same variable, okay? The class variable are common to all the objects which I create from this class, okay? And here I have a bunch of instance variables for which I use this word self here, okay? And this self here is indicating that these are instance variables that are specific to each of the instances of the objects, okay? So we defined two types of variables, and we also defined two methods, okay, which are using both the instance variables and the class variables printing ID is using all these instance variables plus an additional variables which I added here. And make order is using these class variables plus the instance variables here. And what I showed you is how to use these methods and make instances of this class. Okay, and these are the very basics of object-oriented coding. With these ingredients, you can already write nice object-oriented codes and write many things we already did in a much more compact way. Okay, I want to finish now to make it, as I said, shorter today. Next time I will tell you a bit more about object-oriented, but as I said, Matan, before you arrived, we will dedicate next time to, I will give you exercises and I will pass between you and give you personalized help to see how I can help you, each of you. Other questions?
את יכולה לחזור מה זה היה adjective הזה?
כן. אני יכולה, so, okay, I will just say that if you don't have question, we can finish now, okay? I will now answer questions, but if we don't want to hear the answer, it's fine. So, okay, so Ariel is asking me what is this variable? And what I wanted to show you is I wanted to show you that, okay, let's assume that we're not having this adjective variable. So if I only have self here, I can only use the instance variables, these variables in my methods. Okay? And then the way to, so you understand? Ariel?
עוד פעם מה?
כשיש לי רק self פה, אז when I only have self here, this method can only use all these variables, which are defined in the init methods, okay, and are called the instance variable.
Okay.
Okay, and then if I have a method like this, which only uses self, okay, the way to call it will be human one printing ID. I'm going to erase this. Okay.
printing ID זה פעולה ש... אוקיי, הנה זה.
Okay, so, okay. Now, why did I add adjective? I wanted to show you that sometimes you will want in your methods to use other variables, not only these variables. And of course, you can define here 1,000 variables, but there is a trade-off here because these variables, as I said, the def init, this is run every time you make an instance of this class. So you want to keep it relatively short. You don't want to put here 1,000 variables. And let's assume there is one variable that you know will only be used in this function. Okay? So I have a function that tells me the IQ of the human. Okay? Okay?
Okay.
Okay, and I don't want to use it over and over I don't want to add it here for memory reasons. Okay, I just want to use it for the IQ methods. Okay, so I will define it here. The human hold. Okay, this is my method. Okay, and then if I want to use this method, I cannot leave the parentheses empty here. I need to put something in the parentheses because this method is using these variables, but also it requires that you give it an additional variable. You understand?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the adjective before it was the same idea. I wanted to show you that by default, all the methods, they inherit these variables. If you write self, they inherit all these variables. But if you want to add some more arguments to your method, which will only be used locally for this specific method, you can.
Okay.
Okay? Matan, you had a question?
I just wanted to make sure that the trigo still starts at 2, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so have a good week, guys.
רגע,
ביי.
מעיין,
כן.
אז אמרנו, הסלף, כאילו יכולת לרשום גם יומן אחד וזה, אבל זה היה מספיק לך כאילו עבור יומן אחד, ואז היית צריכה לעשות את זה שוב עבור יומן 2, נכון? או שגם... עשית כאילו print the name of this human is פלוס self נקודה first name וכן הלאה. אז זה כאילו... את צריכה לעשות את זה כאילו עבור יומן אחד ועבור יומן 2? איך זה...
לא, אם אני רוצה, אם יש לי את human 2, human 2, אוקיי? אני מגדירה עכשיו human אחר, אז אני יכולה להדפיס לו את אותו דבר, להשתמש בפונקציה printing ID.
כן, זה מה שהתכוונתי, כאילו עבור יומן אחד ועבור יומן 2.
כן, אבל אני לא צריכה, ברגע שהגדרתי את האובייקט הזה, את human 2, ונתתי לו שם וזה, אני לא צריכה שוב לכתוב human 2 first name שווה אתה מבין? זה כאילו ברגע שאני מגדירה את האובייקט הזה, פייתון מריץ את זה.
לא, זה, כן, מה שהתכוונתי זה כאילו עבור למטה יותר על הפרינט, אבל הבנתי.
בסדר? אוקיי.
אני רק אצלם שנייה בסדר, תודה. ביי.
יופי. ביי, שבוע טוב, ביי.